Hi there, thanks for joining me. In this video, we'll take a look at how to make text using Photoshop. The first thing you'll want to do is create a new document in Photoshop by going to the File menu and then choose New. If you're going to be printing your document, you'll want to work in inches. If you're going to be working on the web, you'll more than likely want to work in pixels. If you were going to print on a standard piece of printer paper, that would be 8.5 by 11 inches. Your resolution is going to control how detailed your print is. If you're working on the web, you'll want to set it to 72. If you're going to print, you'll want to set it to 300. For this example, I'm just going to leave it set at 72. And if you're working in print, you'll want to set it to CMYK. If not, you can just leave it at RGB. And it's fine to print from RGB as well. So when in doubt, just go ahead and use these settings here. If you're going to print, go ahead and set it to 300. And then you'll want to set your background color, which you can change after the fact to any color really. But if you wanted there to be a transparent background, you could go ahead and select that. We'll just choose white for now. And our color profile, you can just leave it set to sRGB, and we'll go to OK. That's how we make our new document. Now I'm just going to jump back to this other example here, which is the same size document, but it's got some text that I've placed in here. And you can see that I have a whole bunch of palettes here. These are how they're set up on my computer. You might not be able to find these palettes at first, so we're going to locate some of those. You'll go to the window menu up here at the top, and the palettes that we're going to want are character, and we're going to want paragraph, and we're going to want swatches and color, and also layers. So if you can find these and open them, get them arranged on your computer however you like it. And if you're having trouble just getting anything to work, maybe your workspace might be a little messed up, and it might benefit you to go to Window Workspace and either reset your workspace or change to a different workspace, and maybe some of these palettes will be a little easier to find. So most importantly, we have our character palette here, and this controls our font style, our font size, all of the properties, even our font color. We have our layers palette, which is going to show us where in our artwork our individual layers are located. So for instance, if I wanted to move this red text here independently of anything else in this composition, I can do that because this red text here is on its own layer. And a layer is just, you could think of it just like little pieces of text that are kind of stacked on top of each other in three-dimensional space. This with Photoshop is a piece of text, and these are all still editable. So if I wanted to change the text, I could do that really easily. I can even change the color if I want to something else. So to create text, the first thing that you want to do is select the Type tool, or you can press T on your keyboard. That's the shortcut. If you click with it in a blank area of your document, you will create a new line of text, and you can type anything here and it will begin to just flow out from that point, and you'll just have a long string of text that will never line break. If you want to create a paragraph, you'll want to click with the text tool and drag a box, and this box that you drag will define the paragraph size. So now if I just start typing something, you could see it gets confined within this space with a little bit of margin. And now if I want to expand that paragraph, I can do so. And now we can do some different things like control how the paragraph justifies and aligns if we want to. Each time that you create a piece of text, you're going to create a new text layer. If you use the text tool to click on a piece of text that's already in your document here, what's going to happen is you're going to enable the editing of that piece of text. So you have to kind of watch where you click with the Type tool. If you edit text, you'll get this little dialog up here that's going to ask you every time you make a change whether or not you want to cancel it or keep it. And so every time you make a change here to your text, you're going to have to go up here and you're going to have to click one or the other. Most of the time you're going to want to click commit. Unless you don't like that change, then you're going to want to click cancel. So I'm going to commit, but you'll want to watch out with this type tool because you might accidentally click on some piece of type accidentally that's already there when you intended to create a piece of type. So if that's the case, you can always click over here, create a piece of type, and then just move it where you want if you find that the type tool is interfering with another piece of type. Or you can use this eyeball icon here to temporarily hide, or with the layer selected you can lock it and then you won't be able to do anything to it until you unlock it. If you want to delete a layer or a piece of type, you'll want to select the layer that you want to delete and click on this little trash can at the bottom of the layers palette. So I'm going to delete that one and this one, and you can see clearly what they're named. If you want to change the name of a particular piece of text, you can double click on the name here and you can rename it. Let's just call this trash. This is the one that we're going to trash here, and now it's gone. Now we'll look at how to edit some of this text, some of the basic things. So select my type tool to create a new piece of text, and I find that rather than try to set all of these settings ahead of time and pick a specific font and a specific font size, it's easier just to take the type tool and just click and just put a piece of text down and just type in whatever your text is. So let's say I'm going to add to this current composition I have here. Maybe this will be an additional piece of text that I'm going to add. I'll just type out what it is, and then rather than go in here and pick a font size, unless I need a specific font size, what I'll do is I'll do a transform. So you can transform this by doing free transform or Control T, and I like the keyboard shortcut of Control T, so I prefer to do that. I just hit Control T, then I get this box, and this box will let me scale my text up and down, and when I do that, it's going to automatically scale the font size. So this is more intuitive than picking a font size here. You can really just size it by eye, and that's how I prefer to size my fonts, because then I know that I can just get more control out of it. Now, the way this transform tool works is if you drag a corner, if you click and you hold and you drag, you're going to squash and you're going to stretch the text. However, if you hold Shift on your keyboard while you're dragging, you will constrain the text in proportion. So it's not going to squash, but it'll still get bigger. If you hold Alt and Shift together, then you'll scale it in proportion from the center. So I prefer to do this the majority of the time because it's easier to place the text where you want it, and then rather than scale it and move it multiple times, it's easier just to position it and then scale it from the center so that you don't have to keep moving it around side to side. And if you wanted to, you can also hover over the corner here till your pointer changes to this little curved arrow, and then you can rotate if you click and you drag, if you want to rotate your text. We can get it to match there. And again, after making all these changes, we'll have to either cancel or commit before it will apply this effect here that we did. So we'll go to commit, and there you go. Our text is now changed. There's a text layer here called video tutorial, which is the text that we typed in. And if we wanted to change the name, we could call it subtitle or anything else that we want. Now if we want to change the color, we can do that here and the character palette, and you'll have to have the piece of text selected in the layers palette, and you can use the color picker here to drag and pick any color that you want. You can change the hue over here, so you can really get just about any color you want. There's also a couple other ways to pick color, but we'll get to that just a little bit later. We can change the font in the characters palette to any of these fonts that you want. Change it to this. And then I'm using the free transform with Control T and then holding Shift and Alt while I scale. That way it stays pretty much centered. And then I don't have to reposition it. Now, if you want to install new fonts, there's a lot of free fonts that you can get that are public domain fonts or just fonts that people offer for free, or you can even buy fonts online. And if you want to install new fonts, you're going to want to go to your control panel. And in your control panel, there is a fonts folder. Now, all you really have to do is open this fonts folder and drag any of your downloaded or newly acquired fonts files into this folder. And once they're in this folder, they will install. You'll have to close Photoshop and reopen it, as well as any other application that uses fonts, so that it will reload the fonts. Now we'll take a look at font style. So let's say that we want to make something bold or italic. We can do that in the character palette. So we can choose italic. We can choose bold italic. This is nice to give some character to your fonts here. And we can change lots of other things like the leading and tracking. The leading works with a two-line piece of text, so something that has a line break. So for instance, this how to make text piece here, let's change the leading to something really small. Let's change it to 6 and see what happens. The leading takes the bottom line and moves it closer to the top line of text, so they kind of just get stuck together. So you might find that if you have this set to auto, generally you'll get a pretty good amount of space between your text, but I find in this case auto does too much for my liking, so I found that setting it to 150 worked a little bit better. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to look at what your font size is, and generally your leading is going to be equal to or slightly less than your font size. So if I set this to 163, it's going to give me about the same spacing that I would have if it was set to auto. So I always do just a little less than that. You don't want your font to really be touching unless you want that for like stylistic purposes for a logo or something. And then the tracking here is the distance between each of these letters or the kerning. And you can set that. We can set this a little bit higher to 100, and you can see that these letters spread out further apart from each other. I'll set it back to 25, and I think that looks better. Next, let's look at paragraph options. So if you want to justify or align the text, you can do that. So with the layer selected that you want to modify, you can go to the paragraph palette here, and you can select left. You may have to move your text around and reposition it. You can also justify it in different ways if you have paragraphs here. And if you don't like the hyphens that it will use for line breaks, you can turn this off and it won't hyphenate. Now, if you want to align text, a text layer with another text layer, what you'll do is you'll take your layer adjuster tool, your black arrow, and you will click on one of the two layers that you want to align. You can do more than 2 layers if you want, and then you'll hold shift and you'll select the next layer, or you can hold control and you can select non-contiguous layers, so layers that are not next to each other, by holding control. And once you have the layers selected that you want to align, you'll get these options up here at the top of your screen that will show you some different alignments. Now, if you hover for a second, it will show you exactly what it will do. Let's say we want to align everything to the left, all 3 of these layers. I'm going to click on left align, and you can see that the left edges of these layers all kind of line up here now. Now if I want to align them to the right, I could do that also. Or center. This doesn't always get it perfect, so I'll try this and see if it works, and if it does, great, and if not, then I usually just align things by eye. And most of the time, aligning it by eye looks a little bit better than what the computer thinks is aligned. some things don't look good perfectly centered. They need to be a little bit off. And in this case, everything's kind of slanted, so it shouldn't really be aligned center with the page. It should be aligned center with the paragraph here, which is kind of askew. So in this case, the auto align feature isn't going to work very well. I'll just have to do it by eye. Now we can warp text if we want to, and put some really cool effects on it. We'll select the piece of text that we want to warp here, and we'll get this option for create warped text. We'll click on it, and then we'll select a style. So we can get some different effects. If we want to make it look wavy, we can select flag, and you can see that we get this nice flag effect here. Click back on the option there. Let's try arc. You can control the bend of the arc. You can control the width of the font on either end. And this doesn't apply it to the font permanently. It's kind of a temporary filter. So if you wanted to turn it off, you can turn it off if you don't like it. Now let's take a look at guides and rulers. If you hit Control R on your keyboard, you can get your ruler, or you can go to View, Rulers, and you'll get your rulers. And if you click and you drag on your ruler and you pull down, you can pull down a guide. Sometimes it might be helpful to have guides to align things if you wanted to. You can also click and drag from the side to get a vertical guide. And this could help with aligning some things. If you want to hide your guides or show them again, you can go to the View menu and Show Guides, or you can use the shortcut of Control plus semicolon, and that hides your guides so that you can't see them. Now let's take a look at the vertical type tool. You want to click and hold on the type tool until you get this secondary menu, and then select vertical type tool, and this will let us type vertically if we want to. I'm just going to pick a different font here. We can type some vertical text. Now this is vertical in this orientation, but again, if you wanted to make this type of vertical text, you would do it with a transformation by doing Control T and then just rotating it. So there's two different kinds of vertical here. Now let's take a look at live effects. I mentioned earlier that there was another way to change color, and for this Photoshop layer, the way that we changed it initially was clicking the color swatch here in the character palette, like so, and picking another color. But we can also add a live effect that will let us change our color. So down in the layers palette, there's this little FX button. If we click on this, we're going to get some different effects that we can apply. And what I mean by effects are this stroke here on this red text and this bevel. These are effects. You could even do shadows and all kinds of different glows and things. And these can be temporary effects in the same way that we temporarily applied that arc and warp to this piece of text. So let's choose color overlay, and that will put a color, a solid color, over our particular layer here, which is a piece of text. If we click this swatch, we can get some similar options that we had before. Now you're probably wondering why this is an advantage to just doing it the other way. Well, the reason why this is an advantage is because once we have this effect here, we can copy this effect style and apply it to multiple layers. So sometimes you might have a particular color or a particular set of styles that you want to apply to multiple layers. We can do that quite easily. Let's say I want to make this Photoshop layer look like the how to make text layer. I can right click on the text layer here that I want to copy, and I'll go to Copy Layer Style. And then I'll go to the layer that I want to paste the style onto, and I will right click and I'll go to Paste Layer Style. And you can see that it copies the style over. So that could be really helpful because you can set up all your styles here, and more often than not you might have a particular style that you want to duplicate within your composition. Some other live effects that we can look at. We'll double click on the effects menu here, and we can do a drop shadow. We'll click on the effect and check it to enable it. And then let's change the distance first. Let's drag this a little bit higher so we can move the shadow further away. And then let's change the size. That'll make it spread out and make it fuzzier. And let's change the opacity to make it fainter. And generally those are the three settings that I use. I might play with the angle depending. This use global light, what this will do, if this is on, this is going to change the lighting on your bevel and any other effects that use light, which is a good thing because your bevel is kind of acting like a three-dimensional object. So if the light's coming this way and making the top edge of the bevel lighter, you also want it to make the shadow go the same direction, because that's how it would in a naturally lit situation. So you can see the angle of the lights remaining consistent. If for some reason you didn't want it to be that way and you wanted the shadow to go the opposite direction or any other direction, you would want to uncheck use global light, and then you can make the shadow go any direction you want. Most of the time you're going to want to leave that on. You can change the color and the blend of the shadow. If we wanted to make it, let's say red, we can do that. If I increase the opacity, you can really see it there. And if you had multiple layers and you wanted to change how the shadow blends, you could play around with these. Most of the time you're going to want to leave it to multiply. And we will go to OK, and you can see that we've got a nice drop shadow. Now I'm not going to go over all these effects. You could try these out and experiment and see. I have bevel, of course, and stroke is another one. Just try them out and see what they do. And you can get some nice effects. But you really just kind of have to experiment here. I think once you've applied a couple of these, you'll kind of get how it works. And then it's just up to you to be kind of creative and play around with it and try to get the effects that you want. And again, if you want to copy a particular effect and paste it, you right click on the layer, go to Copy Layer Style, and then you can even select multiple pieces of text. Let's do all three of these, and let's do Paste Layer Style. And now we've pasted it to all of these layers. Now they all have the same style. Now the next thing that I want to go over is duplicating layers, because that can be really helpful sometimes if you're working with layers that you want to remain consistent. So let's say this subtitle layer right here, video tutorial. If we were doing a layout and we wanted to put something the exact same size and the exact same font underneath it, we could take the type tool and we could try to start out and type a piece of text that was the same font and try to get it right and try to rotate it, but chances are it's not going to be identical in font size and rotation. So the easier thing to do would be to duplicate this layer and then change the text. So if we right click on the subtitle layer and we go to duplicate layer, we'll get a copy. Then we can use the black arrow tool to move this copy down underneath. It could even be helpful to hold shift while you drag, and holding shift will constrain it on its vertical or horizontal axis. So if you were doing pieces of text that you wanted to be exactly lined up, holding shift would make sure that you move while you're still constrained to that axis, and that it can't go side to side at all. It just goes straight down. So you can see if I move my mouse left or right, it doesn't move it left or right, it only goes up or down. If we wanted to move it just on this axis here, we could do that. You can see I'm moving my mouse up and down, but it's not going up and down because I'm holding shift. It's only being constrained on this horizontal axis now. So you'll have to try that and see how it works. But we'll go ahead and move this down. There's another way to duplicate, which could be a little bit faster. With your black arrow tool selected, if you hold down Alt on your keyboard, your cursor will change to this double arrow with a black and white arrow. And if you click and you drag, you will drag a duplicate. And you could drag as many duplicates as you want. If for some reason you wanted to make a lot of different pieces of text that were the same, you can use that same trick holding Shift. So I'm going to hold Alt and drag, and I'm going to hold Shift while holding Alt. And now I'm going to drag a duplicate while constraining it to this vertical axis. Now that we have multiples here, let's select all three of them, and let's go up here to this distribution option, and let's distribute them equally from the vertical centers. And what that will do is that will make sure that they're evenly spaced. I'll move one really off here, and then you can see how this works a little bit better. Select all three of them again and distribute from vertical centers, and you can see that it distributes them equally from each other. This doesn't always work sometimes with things that are different shapes and sizes, and again, you might have to kind of rearrange these by eye to get them to look right. Now the next thing that we'll look at is rasterization versus vector. And right now, all of these type layers and any type layers that you create initially are vector format. So that means that you can scale them up and make them bigger and smaller, and they're never really going to lose resolution or get blurry unless you rasterize them. And if you rasterize them, what that's going to do is that's going to make them specific defined size, and if you try to make it any bigger than that size and scale it larger, it's going to make the text blurrier. So you're probably wondering why you would ever want to do that. And in some cases you might want to do that because you might want to edit the text a little more than you can while it's in a vector format. So if you know that you're not going to want to scale the text anymore, but maybe you want to apply some effects to it, you can do that. So let's just rasterize all of this text that we have here. So there's two ways you can do it. One is you can right click on the layer and you can go to rasterize type, or you can select all of the layers by holding Shift, and you can go to rasterize type, and then you can do them all. And if you want to group these layers, you can do a Control-G on your keyboard to group them, and then you can do a Control-E on your keyboard to merge the layers. So now these are all one single layer. They're no longer editable text, they're an image now. So they're kind of a picture of text if you think about it that way. So now we can do some different things to the layer there. If we wanted to, let's say, smudge it to get some kind of weird effects, we could erase parts of it now. We could put a mask onto it, and then we could paint in a mask with some sort of textured brush. I'm going to click on the mask first. Here we go. And you can see that I can kind of mask off part of it, and then I can bring back part of it using the opposite color in my mask, and then I can get a kind of stressed vintage effect that you wouldn't be able to get initially with text that wasn't rasterized. So that would be the advantage to rasterizing text, and that's okay to do if, like I said before, if you're done scaling it up and down, and at this point you're just going to want to make it look a little more grungy or give it some effects, then it's okay to rasterize it. However, if you wanted this to be editable and to be something that maybe you turn into a PDF and you want people to try to be able to copy and paste text out of here, you definitely wouldn't want to rasterize the text. You'd lose all the editability of that text when you rasterize. So now let's take a look at saving files. We'll do a save as from the file menu, and we get a lot of different options here. Typically I will save my composition as a Photoshop PSD with layers, and that way it'll preserve all of my layers and all of my editable text. However, if I'm going to put this on the web, then I will choose PNG or JPEG. If I'm going to print, I will use TIFF. If you're going to export for the web, then you'll want to do save for web. You get some better options here where you can easily resize this. Let's say I know that this needs to be exactly 300 wide. I can type in 300 in the width here, make it smaller. I can change the file type to any of these other types. I use PNG 24 because that's better quality than JPEG. JPEG's not always a good format to use because it's going to throw away some information to make the file smaller, so it might change your colors, it might make your image look blocky, might do some bad things to it. PNG won't do that, so that's a good option. PNG also supports transparency, so if you wanted to have a transparent background, you could do that as well. What I mean by transparent background is this checkerboard pattern represents transparency. So if you can see this checkerboard, that means that nothing is going to print there. If you can't see it and you see white, then you'll know that if you were to print this, it's going to print a white box around everything. This whole white background is going to print on your print. So if you were trying to make a decal for a window and you didn't want it to have a white background, you just wanted it to just see the text, you would want to turn the background off so that there's no background. And then this will just print as is without anything being back there. You won't see this checker pattern. It'll just be invisible, clear, transparent. So to save a file with the transparent background, you have to save as a TIFF, a Photoshop file, or a PNG. And you want to make sure that transparency is checked here and that you can see this checkered background. JPEG doesn't support transparency, so if you save it as a JPEG, it's gonna, even though it's showing you this checker pattern, it's still gonna insert a white background because JPEG doesn't support transparency. So I hope that answered all of your questions about how to create and edit text in Photoshop. If I missed anything, feel free to comment on this video and I'll be happy to get back to you. If you found this information useful, take a quick second to like this video and share it, and that'll make it easier for other artists out there to find this information. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for my next video.